It's Friday, October 23rd. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blancolirio channel. And today we have a preliminary report from the NTSB regarding the crash of the TBM-700 aircraft on 2 October near Buffalo, New York. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of new information in this preliminary report as the NTSB did not travel to the scene of this accident. On October 2nd, 2020, about 11:45 Eastern Daylight Time, a Socata TBM-700 November 965 Delta Mike was destroyed when it was involved in an accident near Corfu, if I'm saying that correctly, Corfu, New York. The private pilot and passenger were fatally injured. The airplane was operated as a Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations Part 91 personal flight. So this was his own personal aircraft, and he was operating it as a private pilot with an instrument rating, not commercially rated, not ATP rated. The aircraft was topped off with 173 gallons of Jet A fuel prior to the first flight of the day on October 2nd, 2020. The TBM topped off means the tanks were filled all the way to the top, and that load took 173 gallons of gas. The total fuel load on the TBM, I believe, is about 290 gallons. The TBM burns about 50 to 55 gallons per hour. It does not look like fuel was an issue in this accident. The airplane was topped off with 173 gallons of Jet A prior to the first flight of the day on October 2nd, 2020. The first flight departed Buffalo Niagara International Airport, BUF, at 07:47 and landed at Manchester, MHT, New Hampshire at 9:14. So about an hour and a half long flight. According to personnel at the fixed base operation, the line office, at MHT, the passenger boarded the airplane and it departed without obtaining any services there. So they didn't take on any additional fuel. They're going to return back to Buffalo. Again, the fuel, if it was topped off before the beginning of both of these flights, should not be a factor. Plenty of range. Preliminary radar data provided by the FAA indicated the airplane departed from runway 6 at MHT at 10:19 and initiated a climbing left-hand turn to the west. The airplane climbed to a cruise altitude of flight level 280. Anything above flight level 180, you got to be IFR. You're under instrument flight rules on an instrument flight plan in positive radar identification, and remained at that altitude until 11:42. So again, about an hour and a half. According to a review of air traffic control voice communications data, the pilot did not check in with the Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center during a routine handoff from one controller to another. And we talked about this in the previous update, and we heard it on VAS Aviation's update on this accident. The pilot subsequently reestablished communication with a radar controller about 15 miles east of Buffalo while still flying at flight level 280. And as we saw in the previous update, that was very close to the airport in order to start his descent for the ILS approach. The pilot subsequently reestablished communication with the radar controller about 15 east of Buffalo while still flying at 280 and requested the ILS runway 23 approach into Buffalo. The controller instructed the pilot to descend to 8,000 feet, pretty major descent, 20,000 feet. The idea was to bring the aircraft. The controller knew that he was too close to the Buffalo airport, so he's going to radar vector the aircraft beyond the Buffalo airport, box him around a radar pattern, give him the room that he needs to descend, and get him established on the ILS approach into Buffalo. And as I said on the first update, it's not clear to me if the pilot in command here understood what that plan meant. The controller instructed the pilot to descend to 8,000 feet and expect the ILS to runway 23 approach at Buffalo, and asked him if everything was okay, to which the pilot responded, "Yes, sir, everything's fine." Subsequently, the controller observed the airplane descending rapidly on radar and instructed the pilot to stop the descent at 10,000 feet. The pilot did not respond. The controller made several additional attempts to establish communications with the pilot. However, there were no further communications received from the pilot. Over the final 3 minutes of the flight, as the airplane descended from flight level 280, it accelerated from its previously established cruise ground speed of 250 knots. Remember, these are ground speed readouts from the NTSB data. It's not indicated airspeed, it's not calibrated airspeed, it's ground speed. As the airplane descended through 15,200 feet, its radar-derived ground speed rose to more than 340 knots, and its estimated descent rate was 13,800 feet per minute, well outside of the limits for the airplane, regardless of whether it's ground speed or airspeed. The airplane made one right 360-degree turn before radar contact was lost. According to several witnesses who heard the airplane shortly before the accident, the engine sounded very loud before they heard the sounds of impact. In other words, the engine was operating fine. The airplane was located in a heavily wooded, swampy area. The airplane was fragmented and a post-crash fire ensued after the impact. Wreckage and components of the airplane were recovered from the surface of the terrain to a depth of 15 feet. Below the surface. The smell of Jet A aviation fuel was noted at the aviation accident site by first responders. The airframe and engine components were recovered from the accident site, were retained for further examination. And that's the end of the preliminary report. The weather appears to not be much of a factor. 10 miles visibility, a few clouds at 2,000 feet, broken clouds at 6,000 feet, light winds 9 knots out of the west. Again, 10 miles visibility. And add a note at the bottom of the report, the NTSB did not travel to the scene of this accident. And the most important part that I wanted to hopefully find out in this preliminary report from the NTSB, had they traveled to the scene of the accident, they would have hopefully let us know if they found what they call all 4 corners of the aircraft. Were they able to find that the aircraft went in one piece, or did the aircraft suffer an in-flight breakup on its way down? Additional participating persons on this report does include the FAA, FSDO out of Buffalo, New York, somebody from Daher Aircraft out of Paris, somebody from Hartzell Propeller, and somebody from Pratt & Whitney Engines. But the NTSB did not travel to the scene of this accident. And unfortunately, the NTSB is not traveling to most accidents right now because of COVID-19. The NTSB was originally formed in 1967 to provide oversight to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, because it's the FAA's job to regulate aviation, and folks didn't want the regulators that regulate aviation doing all the accident investigations and possibly biasing their opinions on what caused some of these accidents. So the NTSB was formed to help get to the bottom of some of these accidents, and even though these reports can take a long time to come out, they provide a wealth of information as to what causes these accidents and how to prevent them in the future. The NTSB doesn't have any regulatory capability. They can only make recommendations once they've worked out the causes of these accidents and make these recommendations back to the FAA in an effort to implement any changes that might make aviation safer. Now, during my first update, I took a lot of heat when I was referencing the lawyers involved in this accident. This is a high-profile accident involving a high-profile accident lawyer out of the Buffalo, New York area from a firm that was apparently breaking up at the time that involved several dozen lawyers. And the lawsuits are going to begin to fly from this accident before the accident investigation is complete, either from the NTSB or whoever finishes it up. And unfortunately, it's the job of a good lawyer to twist the truth in favor of his clients, Without the help of the NTSB on this particular accident, it's going to be even more difficult to get to the bottom of what happened in this particular accident, and it's going to be easier for the lawyers to twist the truth into whatever they need to get their clients the biggest outcome from this accident. And I've seen this happen over and over and over before in aviation history. It's the result of these often frivolous lawsuits, when it's often clearly pilot error in these accidents, that results in huge losses to the aviation community. It's why back in the 80s and 90s, general aviation aircraft production was basically shut down. And now, today, as a result, what few aviation companies, general aviation companies that survived, came back into production, produce aircraft, single engine Cessna aircraft, for example, that cost over $500,000 a piece, well out of the reach of the average general aviation pilot. And as a result, only the people with that kind of money are able to get involved in aviation if they want to buy any new equipment to begin with. And the people with that sort of money don't always have that sort of talent, training, or interest in aviation to keep aviation safe. So let's hope that the NTSB gets back into the field soon and can continue to contribute to aviation safety by investigating these aircraft accidents. Thanks so much for your support of this channel and for your support over here on Patreon that makes this content possible. I got to head back to Dallas for another week of international training, and then I'll be waiting for IOE, get lined up with a Czech airman to do some initial operating experience back on the Boeing 777 as I head back to the flight line in November. Thanks for your support. See you here.